Yeah, I've just been working on this song. It's the sound of the devil taking over the world.
My name is John Doran. I write about music. Over the history of British Masters, I've had the privilege of talking to a great many music-making outliers and innovators. From Gary Newman to Dizzy Rascal, from Marquis Smith to Viv Albertine. These are heroes, one and all. To celebrate the 6th birthday of the series, we've organised something special, British Masters Live. Tonight, I'm interviewing Brett Anderson of Suede, live on stage at the Rio Cinema in London.
First of all, Brett Anderson, welcome to British Masters.
Thank you very much.
Do you identify as British?
It depends who I'm talking to, really, I suppose. Reluctantly, yes. I don't feel particularly proud to be British. I feel quite European, I suppose.
Now that the B word has been brought up, I don't want to get...
What word's that?
Well, British. It's kind of like, I don't want to get too bogged down in stuff
You
about...
brought it up.
I know, man.
Yeah,
it's really sneaky.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
I don't want to get too bogged down in Britpop stuff, but...
Yes.
Did you read the not at all spurious opinion piece recently that seemed to blame Brexit on Britpop?
Wow. No, I didn't read that. It's. I mean, you don't really hear much about Brexit these days, do you? What happened to that? I mean, you know, it's a bit of a flash in the pan. I think Britpop is to blame for quite a few things, but I wouldn't have thought of Brexit as being one of them. But you know, yeah. Give me a kind of, a sort of rundown of that.
I didn't read it. I was just like, I really might. Once you get past a certain stage in your life, your time just becomes a bit too precious.
I know what you mean. Yeah, I just read the headlines. As I scan, read it. Yeah, Britpop.
I was like, yeah, here's a thing that's been designed to make me really angry. So
yes.
I'm just not going to read it today.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
I don't know. I do think, in a very loose background sort of way, Britpop was clearly a symptom of a change in national attitude.
You know, I've got a lot to say about Britpop. It seems incredibly dated now. Faintly misogynistic and faintly nationalistic in a way that I don't think would be allowed to become a movement now. All the kind of undertones, the men behaving badly culture, the loaded culture, that sort of thing. And I think we live in a very, very different time now. I don't think that Britpop will be allowed to happen, and probably thank God for that, But before it becomes a bloated self-parody, it was a rejection of American cultural imperialism, and it was a documentation of the world that we saw around us, or that I saw around me. It was kind of like standing in the dole queue, this sort of thing.
So Justin Frischman said something which really resonated with me, which, whether she meant it 100% or not, she said, when I first saw Brett, I couldn't tell whether he was a boy or a girl. And, in some of the more lumpen areas of the press, you were kind of like mocked for this. Maybe gently, but you were mocked anyway.
Yeah.
However, fast forward to 2018, when the ideas of gender fluidity...
Who's having the last laugh now, eh?
Suede were ahead of the time, though, right?
Well, I can't say that, can I? But thank you, yes, I have to. It's a weird thing. I thought about it a lot, and in a funny sort of way, in terms of blurring the lines with sexuality, I was trying to talk about myself as an emotional being rather than a sexual being, which is a real paradox, because I was using sort of gender terms, words like bisexual to define that sort of thing. That's right. It's all very confusing for me, actually, what I was trying to do. But I certainly wasn't content just to sort of sing from the first person as a sort of like, a heterosexual male. That was kind of like quite dull to me, doing that, and I think people got confused by that, and people sort of like saw it as sort of like as social tourism and that sort of thing. But I was sort of singing from people's perspectives that were kind of more marginal in those days, and under the umbrella of quite sort of homophobic, misogynistic kind of undertones and homophobic undertones, and it was frowned upon in those days.
It feels like this year is like a particularly good year to be a Suede fan. Not just your memoir, Cold Black Mornings, not just the album, The Blue Hour, but even this week, the documentary, The Insatiable Ones, on Sky Arts, which is, an absolute roller coaster ride.
Yes.
The rise and fall and rise again of Suede. I'm guessing that my enjoyment of it was probably slightly different to yours in some respects.
Yeah.
How was it when you first watched it?
Yeah, enjoyment's the wrong word, really. I was sort of like watching it like this through my fingers, sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of odd because enjoyment is exactly the wrong word. But I'm kind of quite strangely quite proud of it all. That's something I learned from writing Coal Black Mornings is to sort of be proud of your failures as well. I think that's a kind of a key thing. I think there's too much sort of like PR bullshit with bands, almost like reinvent their lives and talk about their lives like they've had these perfect careers and brush over their mistakes. And I think it's the mistakes that are kind of the interesting things. And I'm kind of quite proud of our mistakes. So we've made quite a few, but I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of.
I was really impressed with how frank you were, especially about the kind of darkness that happened after the Coming Up world tour ended and around the writing of Head Music. Was it a liberating experience?
You know, when I've talked about addiction in Afternoons with the Blinds Drawn, it's sort of like I'm talking about the broader concepts of addiction. I've learned from dealing with the media over the last 25 years, as soon as you use specific words, you know, like certain drugs or whatever, even the word drugs, it just gets blown out of proportion. It takes up so much media space. So it's just about knowing those things. And it's about waking up the next day and looking what I've written the day before and thinking, am I happy with that? Can I live with that for the rest of my life? And that's a wonderful thing about kind of writing, is that you have got that ultimate control. Teetering on that line between, you know, giving too much away, but also keeping it interesting. It's balancing along that line, walking that tightrope.
Obviously, there's stuff to do with kind of drinking narcotics. I'm not really being tabloidy. I can sort of identify to a certain
Yes, I've read
degree.
your memoir as well. So yeah, I don't know if anyone's read Jolly Lads. It's very explicit about John's past. Excellent book, by the way. I recommend it. Yeah.
One thing that I did think when I was watching the documentary was I kind of felt some pain by proxy, thinking I'm really pleased that I don't have to watch all of this footage of myself being absolutely off my fucking nut. Like,
the most embarrassing bit for me is watching me sing an a cappella version of Head Music in a vocal booth. It's very, very cruel because when you kind of like, you know, when you strip anything down to a cappella, it sounds rubbish.
I wanted to talk to you very quickly about A New Morning.
Oh, really?
And yeah, but it was just, it comes good in the end.
Okay, good.
There's maybe a common misconception about Suede, which is like Head Music and A New Morning were written in this kind of alcoholic, narcotic fog. And of course, the last album wasn't. You know, you'd cleaned up by that point,
yeah,
didn't you?
Yeah. After a while, drugs kind of end up defining you to a certain extent. If you've like, you know, been taking drugs for a long time, and then suddenly taking them away, you're sort of like you're scrabbling around for a new personality. You're scrabbling around for something else that defines you. And I felt that that's what was happening with A New Morning. I was kind of struggling to kind of like to really define myself. And, you know, that's possibly one of the reasons why that album just didn't work, because I didn't really know who I was, and I didn't really know what I was singing about and what to be reflecting, you know, splitting up and the whole journey. Is that when we came back, it reminded us of what we did really well in the first place. And we kind of thought, well, let's try and do that again rather than something else.
And it was really gratifying to see you come back, keeping your edge, living a healthy lifestyle, but really reconnecting with this fundamental wrongness that is at the heart of Suede.
Absolutely. There's always tenebrous corners of life that you can sing about. There's equal worth in kind of like small misunderstandings and relationships that kind of like dissolve in quiet ruin and these sorts of things, you know, always searching for things that I'm passionate about. You know, the last couple of albums I've written about family, because family it has become my new obsession in life. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't live a kind of like a riotous life anymore, full of kind of like crashing romances and stuff like this. It's not like that. It's much more stable life. But you have to look for where your passions lie. And my passion now is my family. So I kind of like, I dwell on the kind of the neurosis of being a family man, you know. And it's just looking for the darkness, and I can kind of find the darkness in anything, really.
Do you feel that if you had anything to prove since you've been back, that it's now proved?
I don't ever feel that there's ever an end point with these things, and I always feel as though we have something to prove. There's something about the nature of Suede that I never feel as though we're completely sort of accepted. It's not like we're kind of, we've never quite got to that sort of like upper echelon. You know, when we're writing, we throw away so much. We're never just on autopilot. I've learned that's how we crash and burn when we go on autopilot. We have to always be aiming above where we are, sort of thing, to get to the right place, sort of thing. So, yeah, I always think we've got something to prove. And the day that I feel as though we haven't is probably when we'll stop. So I like to think we always will have something to prove.
And easy for me to say, right? But that's good that you have to struggle, really. And
yeah, no, it's great.
You're not afforded the kudos of the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah, it's fine. I think Suede, we sort of provoke quite a lot of cynicism in people. We always have. There's just something in our DNA, you know. From those very early days when half the press absolutely loved us and half the press absolutely hated us, and we do polarize people, and we continue to polarize people's point of view as well. And I think that's a really good thing, isn't it? It's kind of, you know, it's extreme feelings. It's surely that's a good thing, you know.
What I'm really curious about is your current songwriting process, and I mean, I guess a good way of looking at this would be to take the album opener as one.
Yes.
Which is, you know, for my money, it's like it's the strongest album opener you've ever written.
When we were mixing it, and I overheard Alan Moulder talking to his wife on the phone, and he said, "Yeah, I've just been working on this song. It sounds it's the sound of the devil taking over the world."
I think this would be a good point to talk to you about the non-musical influences on the Blue Hour.
Yeah, I'm always kind of like, that's the way I work. I just use little snippets. There's bits and pieces from poetry that I throw in there. There's a little bits of D.H. Lawrence and things like that. I'm a bit of a magpie. I think lots of writers are. That's the way they write. I have notebooks, and when I'm reading, which I do a lot of, if I like a phrase, I just steal it, and hopefully no one's kind of going to sue me about it. I'm sure one day it'll happen. You know, I think Cold Black Mornings I stole from a newspaper, and I don't really know who wrote it in the first place, but it seemed nice, and that's what I do. I nick little snippets of things.
I know that the boy who's lost in the album, it's you rather than your son.
Yeah. Well, it's both of us, and it's.
Did you ever get lost as a kid?
Did I ever get lost?
I mean, properly. I remember being in Aberystwyth, and my grandma was supposed to be looking at me, and she was stealing cuttings of flowers out of someone's garden, and I just wandered off.
Yeah.
And like there was this couple trying to get me into their car, and I was
God.
fucking 7 or something. And like I remember it was like terrifying.
God.
Did you ever get?
No, I didn't have any of a nearness like that. And I never went to Aberystwyth, obviously. Obviously, all happens in Aberystwyth. God, I'll steer clear of that place. Yeah. I won't be moving to Aberystwyth for any time soon. No.
I wanted to ask you, when was the last time you prayed? And I don't mean casually prayed. I mean properly, hands together. Dear God, you have to unfuck this situation really quickly, or whatever. You know, properly saying your prayers.
God, that's a really interesting question, and one I haven't ever been answered. I probably when I was about 11 or something. You know.
What was it for?
I can't remember.
Eagle Eye Action Man.
Getting in trouble. There's a thing in my book where me and a friend of mine wrote a list of imaginary tortures for all the teachers, and we wrote it down in kind of this gory kind of like detail, and one of the teachers got a hold of it, and it was this the most embarrassing thing, you know, hang them from their hair by a helicopter, this sort of thing, you know, this kind of gory medieval tortures, you know, and that's probably the last time I prayed, you know, please let this kind of thing not fall into the wrong hands, you know, so.
You can see some of the roots have swayed in that little notebook.
Absolutely,
Maybe.
it's yes. I'm still. Hopefully, it's not going to appear in the Daily Star or anything. Hopefully, it's been destroyed.
And when was the last time where you genuinely thought, I'm not going to get out of this situation alive?
Oh well, I had a car crash in the summer, which was terrifying, genuinely terrifying. Me and my wife were driving in the countryside, and we were driving around a bend, and a car smashed into us, and it was a terrifying moment. All the kind of the front of the car buckled. I had to drag her to the curb, and that was genuinely horrific. I thought we were going to die. It was a horrific moment, but we didn't. We survived.
Very glad to hear it.
It's genuinely horrific. That's the most scared I've been about kind of, dying since I was, God, a long time, for decades.
Gotta watch those countryside
Terrifying.
roads, right? Gotta watch those countryside roads.
You really have, yes. Yeah, they were pretty scary.
Thanks very much, Brett Anderson.